The bus pulled to a grinding halt outside the U.S. Marine Corps recruit depot in San Diego, the hot California sun burning through the dusty glass. Dozens of young men and women stepped out, each carrying their issued gear and a head full of nervous pride. Among them was Maria Torres, her olive skin glistening with sweat, her expression unreadable. In her right hand, she carried a heavy black duffel bag. Inside it rested something that would soon make her the target of more laughter than she could imagine. An old, rusted rifle wrapped in a cloth faded by time and dust. The weapon wasn't regulation. It wasn't sleek or modern or anything that belonged among the shiny M27s most Marines carried. Its once polished walnut stock was cracked near the butt. The barrel bore tiny spots of rust, and its scope was long gone. But for Maria, that rifle was more than a weapon. It was memory. It was the last piece of her father. Her father, Raul Torres, had been a quiet rancher on the outskirts of El Paso, Texas. He didn't have medals or military honors, but he had discipline. Every evening as the desert sun sank behind the red hills, he taught Maria to shoot, not just to aim, but to feel. A rifle, he would say, is only as strong as the hands that hold it and the heart behind it. When she was 9, he placed the rusted rifle in her hands for the first time. It was too heavy, the barrel wobbling as she tried to steady her aim. Her father laughed softly. "Don't fight it, Mia. Breathe with it. Let it rest with you." She took a deep breath, squeezed the trigger, and the tin can on the fence exploded into the dirt. That day, she found her rhythm, and her father found his pride. Years later, when he passed away from lung disease, the rifle hung over the fireplace, untouched. Maria cleaned it one last time before she enlisted, her fingers trembling as she whispered, "I'll take care of it. Dad, I'll take care of everything." The first week of boot camp was a blur, shouting drill sergeants, endless push-ups, and the kind of exhaustion that stripped you down to your bones. Maria didn't complain. She followed orders, kept her head low, and worked harder than anyone. But even in the toughest moments, she felt the rifle's weight in her duffel bag, a silent reminder of home. When the time came for weapons inspection, the recruits were told to present their gear for review. The others lined up with spotless modern rifles. When Maria unwrapped her old firearm, a murmur swept through the platoon. "Holy hell," one of the guys muttered. "Is that thing from World War II?" Another snickered. "Nah, man, Civil War maybe." Maria said nothing. She wiped the barrel with a small cloth, polishing the metal as best she could. The drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Hayes, stopped in front of her with a raised brow. "Torres, what in God's name is that?" "Sir, it's a personal rifle, sir." "My father's," she answered crisply. He stared at it for a moment, his jaw tightening. "This isn't standard issue. You can't bring this thing to any official drills." "Understood?" "Yes, sir." As Hayes walked on, a tall recruit named Corporal Jensen, one of the senior trainees, chuckled. "Hey, Torres," he called out, "you planning to win wars with that museum piece?" More laughter followed, echoing across the barracks. Maria ignored them, but her chest tightened. She knew mockery when she heard it. Still, she wasn't here to prove anything, not yet. That night, after lights out, she sat on the edge of her bunk. The moonlight from the window glinted faintly on the rifle's barrel. She ran her hand over the cracks in the stock, tracing them like scars. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "A rifle is a mirror. It shows the truth of the shooter." She whispered, "They'll see, Papa." One day. The days that followed were brutal. The Marines demanded perfection, in form, in posture, in spirit. Maria struggled with the endless marches and combat drills, but never once complained. The men in her squad began to notice her endurance. Even Jensen, who led most of the teasing, grudgingly respected her determination. Still, the jokes about her rusty relic continued. During one weapons cleaning session, a recruit named Miller snorted. "That thing looks like it'll crumble if you pull the trigger." Maria smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it never misses." That silenced the laughter, for a few seconds at least. By the end of the second week, the platoon moved to the marksmanship orientation, a simple introduction to range safety and firing technique. Everyone was excited. It was the moment to prove who could actually shoot and who just looked good in uniform. The recruits gathered around the armory, receiving their rifles one by one. When it was Maria's turn, she held up her old weapon. The instructor frowned. "Torres, that antique won't pass inspection. You'll have to use standard gear for official scoring." She nodded, but later that evening, when everyone else went to bed, she sneaked to the empty training field. She laid prone on the cold dirt, loaded the rifle, and sighted an improvised target, a soda can balanced on a wooden post. Her breathing steadied. The rifle felt like an extension of her pulse. Crack! The can vanished into the darkness. She fired again and again until every target was gone. Her groupings were tight, perfect. The rifle's old frame rattled slightly, but it never failed her. When she finished, she unloaded it, sat back, and smiled at the sky. "Still perfect, Papa," she whispered. By the end of the month, Maria had become known around camp as Rusty, a nickname that started as mockery but carried a strange affection now. Some recruits teased her, yes, but others began asking for tips. Her calm under pressure impressed even the instructors. Still, Jensen kept his smirk. He'd often toss a jab across the mess hall. "Careful, Torres. Don't get tetanus from that rifle of yours." Maria would just nod and reply softly, "Better rust than rust out." Her confidence was quiet but unbreakable. She didn't need to talk big. Her time would come. And it came sooner than anyone expected. The next phase of training would test not just strength, but skill. The platoon was heading to the long-range field, a live-fire exercise that would expose who truly had precision, patience, and nerve. As the sun rose over the horizon that morning, Maria packed her old rifle carefully into its cloth wrap. She paused, whispering to it like an old friend. "They laugh now," she said, "but we've got nothing to prove, just something to show." She slung the rifle across her shoulder and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel, unaware that by the end of this journey, the same Marines who mocked her would be cheering her name. Because what they didn't yet know, and what Maria herself barely realized, was that greatness doesn't shine. Sometimes it rusts. The morning sun in San Diego was unforgiving, blazing down on the training grounds like molten brass. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in the heat as rows of recruits pushed through another relentless day of drills. Among them, Maria Torres ran in formation, boots pounding the earth, lungs burning, sweat rolling down her temples. Every step was a test. Every breath, a fight against exhaustion. "Keep up, Torres," shouted Corporal Jensen, his voice slicing through the clamor. He wasn't just barking orders, he was testing her. Testing how far she could bend before she broke. Maria didn't answer. She just nodded, her jaw tight, her pace steady. The heat scorched her, the straps of her rifle digging into her shoulder. She didn't care. Pain was temporary, but the way they looked at her, that lasted. When the platoon finally halted, panting and drenched in sweat, Jensen smirked. "Not bad, Torres. Guess the antique owner's got some gas in her tank after all." Some of the recruits chuckled. Others stayed quiet, secretly impressed by her endurance. Maria just gave a polite nod and looked away, hiding her trembling hands. Inside, she wasn't angry. Not yet. She was determined. That night, after chow, Maria sat on the edge of her bunk, cleaning her rifle in silence. The other women in her barracks played cards, laughing softly. The smell of metal oil filled the room. Her old rifle lay across her lap, gleaming under the flickering light. She moved the cleaning brush carefully through the barrel, slow and steady, a ritual she'd repeated since she was a child. One of the recruits, Private Lewis, glanced over. "You really gonna keep bringing that thing around, Torres? You could request a standard issue." Maria smiled faintly. "This one hits just fine." Lewis shrugged. "If you say so. I just don't get why you'd stick with something that old." Maria paused, then said quietly, "Because it's mine." There was something in her voice, something final. Lewis didn't ask again. The next morning, they were assigned their first tactical shooting simulation. The recruits buzzed with energy. It was the kind of test that separated the good from the great. Targets, distances, wind adjustments, everything mattered. The Marines gathered at the range, rifles in hand. The instructor, Sergeant Hayes, barked, "You'll work in pairs. Accuracy and teamwork. Let's see if you can shoot straight under pressure." Jensen was paired with another corporal, grinning confidently. Maria got paired with Lewis, who looked nervous. When they approached their lane, Lewis whispered, "You sure you don't want to use the issued rifle?" "That thing, I'm sure," Maria said, chambering around. They fired. The reports cracked across the air like thunder. The smell of gunpowder and hot brass filled her lungs. She exhaled slowly, steadying her sights on the distant silhouette. Crack, crack. Her shots landed tight, near perfect. Lewis glanced at her target board and blinked. "Holy hell, Torres. You didn't miss once." Maria didn't reply. She just kept firing, each round echoing with precision, the recoil absorbed by a body trained in patience. When the exercise ended, the instructor walked the line, checking scores. "Lewis and Torres, good coordination," Hayes said. Then he paused. "Torres, every hit in the center, huh?" The comment rippled through the recruits. Jensen, overhearing, muttered, "Fluke." But deep down, something began to shift. Over the next weeks, Maria's quiet excellence started to surface in unexpected ways. During drills, her focus never wavered. In hand-to-hand training, she moved with efficient, precise power, no wasted energy. Even the instructors started noticing her discipline. Still, she wasn't one for boasting. She stayed quiet, sitting alone at mealtime, scribbling notes in a small leather journal, her father's. Inside, it were handwritten phrases he'd left her. "The rifle listens to those who listen first. Control your breathing, not just when you shoot, but when you live." These weren't lessons for war. They were lessons for living. Sometimes, late at night, she'd whisper them to herself before sleep. But respect in the Marines wasn't earned by silence alone. The jokes about her rifle still followed her like shadows. One afternoon, while cleaning their weapons after a drill, Jensen leaned back against the bench and smirked. "You shoot well, Torres. But that thing you carry looks like it came from the Alamo. I don't know how it hasn't fallen apart yet." A few Marines laughed. Maria glanced up, calm as ever. "It's been through worse." "Sure," Jensen replied, grinning. "What's next? You gonna take it to combat? Maybe it'll scare the enemy into surrendering." More laughter. But Hayes, who'd been standing nearby, interrupted with a stern glare. "Enough. If she can outshoot you with that museum piece, Corporal, maybe you should ask her for lessons." The laughter died. Jensen's smirk faltered. Maria didn't say a word, but her eyes met Hayes's briefly, a silent thank you. Weeks turned into months. Training intensified. Longer marches, harsher drills, sleepless nights. Yet through every challenge, Maria endured. There were days her body ached so badly she could barely stand. Her hands blistered, Her shoulders burned from carrying gear. But every time she faltered, she remembered her father's voice. "You're stronger than the wind, Mia. You just don't always believe it." That belief carried her when strength failed. One evening, after a grueling obstacle course, she collapsed behind the barracks, chest heaving. Jensen approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You know," he said, "I gotta admit, you don't quit." Maria glanced at him. "Wasn't raised to." He hesitated. "That rifle of yours. You ever think of retiring it?" She smiled slightly. "No, it hasn't missed yet." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're something else, Torres." For the first time, there wasn't mockery in his tone, just respect he didn't yet know how to express. By the time graduation week approached, Maria had carved out her place. Not as the loudest, not as the strongest, but as the one everyone knew they could rely on. During the final marksmanship test, she wasn't allowed to use her personal rifle. Regulations forbade it. Still, she scored among the top 3 in the unit. Hayes called her performance surgical. Afterward, as the recruits lounged near the range, Jensen tossed her a grin. "So when are you going to bring out your magic rifle again? I want to see that thing in action for real." Maria tilted her head. "You sure you want that?" "Positive," he said. "We'll set it up next week, a friendly challenge. You, me, the range." The others who overheard cheered at the idea. It started as a joke, but by the end of the day, word had spread through the barracks like wildfire. Torres versus Jensen. Old rifle versus modern weapon. Skill versus pride. Even Hayes didn't intervene. He just said, "If it's on your own time, fine, but you both better make it worth watching." That night, Maria sat alone by her bunk, the rifle across her knees. She ran a thumb along its barrel, feeling the small pits of rust like braille. "They think it's about pride," she whispered. "But it's about promise." She remembered her father's hands, guiding hers on that first day under the Texas sun. She remembered the sound of his laughter, the smell of desert sage in the wind. This wasn't just a contest anymore. It was a conversation between a daughter and her father, carried across years and distance through steel and memory. The barracks fell quiet. The moonlight glinted across the rifle, casting a faint reflection on the wall. Maria smiled faintly and whispered to the shadows, "All right, Papa, let's remind them what you taught me." The morning of the field exercise dawned gray and heavy. A thin mist rolled over the hills of the Marine base, shrouding the firing range in a ghostly silence. The recruits moved in formation, rifles slung, boots crunching against wet gravel. The training schedule read, "Simulated combat, long-range precision." To most of them, it was another exhausting test. But to Maria Torres, this was different. This was where the whispers, the smirks, and the nickname Rusty would all be put to rest. As the platoon gathered near the range, Corporal Jensen leaned casually against a jeep, his modern M27 rifle resting across his chest. "You ready, Torres?" He called out, flashing a grin. "Hope your antique doesn't fall apart in the rain." A few Marines laughed. Maria didn't. She just met his eyes and replied, calm as ever, "It survived worse weather than this." Jensen chuckled, shaking his head. "We'll see." They were assigned different stations, 10 recruits per lane, each tasked with hitting moving targets at increasing distances. The challenge was meant to test reaction time, control, and adaptability. It was no simple test. Even the confident shooters missed under the strain of time limits and unpredictable wind. Maria opened her worn case and lifted her rifle with the kind of care that made the others pause. The weapon looked out of place, brown against the sea of matte black steel, but she handled it like something sacred. She checked the barrel, loaded her ammunition, and whispered a soft prayer beneath her breath. The drizzle made the ground slick, and the air smelled like iron and mud. Sergeant Hayes walked by, clipboard in hand. His eyes lingered on Maria for a moment before he said, "You sure that thing's safe, Torres?" "Yes, sir," she replied firmly. "Then show me it's worth the trouble." The first whistle blew. Crack, crack, crack. Shots echoed through the mist. Targets popped up randomly, some at 200 yards, some at 600. The recruits shouted, cursed, adjusted their aim. Maria dropped to one knee, letting her breathing slow until the chaos faded. She sighted the first target, squeezed the trigger, and the old rifle spoke with a deep, thunderous crack. The target fell instantly. She shifted right, another target rose. One shot, down. Her rhythm was fluid, effortless. The recoil didn't jolt her. The sound didn't shake her. She was steady, like she was back on the ranch with her father's hand resting on her shoulder. Then the rifle jammed. The moment froze. Maria tried the bolt, stuck. The rain had soaked the chamber. The humidity had warped the old metal. The mechanism refused to cycle. She took a breath, keeping her face calm, but her pulse pounded in her ears. "Need help, Torres?" Jensen called from 2 lanes over, grinning through the drizzle. Maria ignored him. She laid the rifle down carefully and drew the small tool she always kept in her boot, her father's screwdriver, the same one he'd used to fix this rifle for decades. Her fingers worked quickly, twisting, cleaning the chamber with precision. She wiped the water, checked the bolt, and reloaded. 30 seconds gone. She sighted again. Crack, target down. By the time the final whistle blew, she was behind, but her accuracy was unmatched. When the results were read, Maria had missed only one target due to the jam. Jensen, unsurprisingly, took first place with a perfect score. As the platoon congratulated him, he threw her a smug look. "Not bad, Torres. Maybe if you upgrade to the 21st century, you'll keep up next time." She smiled faintly. "Or maybe if I keep practicing, I won't need to." Jensen laughed, clapping her on the shoulder. "We'll make a real shooter out of you yet." To the rest, it was harmless teasing. But for Maria, the jam cut deeper than any joke. Her father had always told her, a rifle that hesitates costs a second, and a second can cost your life. That night, while the rest of the platoon joked and played cards, Maria sat under the dim light outside the barracks, rain still dripping from the awning. She disassembled the rifle piece by piece, her hands steady, her jaw set. The wood was swollen from moisture. The trigger assembly was slightly warped. She dried each part with care, using her shirt to wipe away the rain. Then she sat still, eyes closed, remembering her father's voice. "If it jams, don't panic. Weapons are like people. They falter when pushed too hard. Calm them down, fix them, and they'll trust you again." She smiled faintly at the memory. When the rifle was whole again, she held it up to the light. "We're not done yet," she whispered. Over the next few days, Maria trained harder than ever. After official drills, she stayed behind to practice. She cleaned her rifle, shot at makeshift targets, and studied wind patterns. Every round she fired carried both frustration and focus. Other recruits began noticing. Private Lewis passed her one evening, pausing to watch. "You ever stop training?" Maria smiled, not taking her eyes off the target. "When I'm perfect." "Seems like you already are," Lewis said quietly before walking off. But perfection was never her goal. It was peace, that feeling her father taught her to find between breaths, between heartbeats. By the time the next field exercise rolled around, something in her had shifted. She no longer carried her rifle like a burden or a keepsake. She carried it like a promise. This time, her shots came smoother, sharper. The rifle didn't jam. Jensen noticed, he'd always noticed. After the exercise, as the recruits gathered for debrief, he walked over, eyebrows raised. "All right, Torres. I gotta hand it to you. You've got the steadiest hand I've seen." Maria wiped her rifle clean. "Thanks." He grinned. "But it's still ugly as hell." She laughed softly, the first time she'd ever laughed at one of his jokes. Later that night, as the platoon shared dinner, the rain returned. They huddled under the mess tent, laughter filling the air. Someone brought up the rifle again, only this time the teasing was mixed with curiosity. "Seriously, Torres," Riller said between bites, "how old is that thing?" "Older than me," she replied. "Why not trade it in?" "Because it reminds me who I am," she said simply. The table fell silent for a moment, not out of pity, but respect. Jensen, breaking the tension, smirked. "Well, maybe that rust's good luck. You almost beat me today." Maria met his eyes. Almost. That one word carried a quiet challenge, and he heard it. The next morning, Jensen posted a notice on the bulletin board. Friendly competition. Open range shoot. Torres versus Jensen. Old Rust versus Modern Fire. The entire platoon buzzed with excitement. Even the instructors approved. It would be a morale event, a chance to build camaraderie. But for Maria, it wasn't about pride. It was about something far deeper, something sacred. That night, she sat by her bunk with her rifle disassembled before her. The barracks were silent, except for the rain tapping the window. Her fingers brushed across the carved initials on the stock. R.T. Raul Torres. Her father's mark. She closed her eyes. "You always said people would laugh until they saw the truth," she whispered. "Let's show them." The storm outside rumbled softly. Maria loaded a single round, sighted through the iron sights at an invisible target across the room, and pulled the trigger with a quiet click. Her lips curved into a steady, confident smile. Tomorrow wasn't just another training day. Tomorrow was the reckoning. The day of the challenge dawned bright and windless, a rare gift for the Marines stationed at the coast. The training range stretched out like a battlefield, frozen in calm. Targets lined up at distances that tested even seasoned marksmen. From the far end of the range, the rhythmic clang of steel targets echoed as instructors set up the event. The recruits gathered early, drawn by curiosity and excitement. Word had spread across the base. Old Rust versus Modern Fire. It wasn't just about shooting anymore. It had become a legend in the making. Maria Torres stood by her bunk before dawn, tightening her boots with deliberate care. Her rifle rested on her bed, freshly cleaned, oiled, and glinting faintly under the fluorescent light. Despite its scars and rusted grooves, it looked alive. She traced her finger along the stock, whispering softly, "Let's make him proud." When she stepped outside, the air was crisp and filled with murmurs. The moment she appeared with that same old rifle slung over her shoulder, a wave of whispers followed her. "Think she can actually beat him?" "Jensen's never missed a target past 800 yards. "Yeah, but you've seen her shoot." "She's scary calm." Maria ignored the chatter. Her focus was absolute. At the range, Corporal Jensen was already there, checking his sleek M27 rifle. The sun reflected off the matte black barrel, and he wore that confident grin that had made him both admired and resented. When he saw Maria approach, he gave a mock salute. "Morning, Rusty. Hope you got enough oil for that museum piece." Maria smiled faintly. "Hope you got enough humility for what's coming." The recruits around them erupted in laughter. Even Sergeant Hayes, standing nearby with a clipboard, chuckled. "All right, both of you, settle down. This isn't a circus. It's a professional test." He turned to the group. "Here's how it goes. You'll each fire 10 rounds at 10 targets, distances from 200 to 1,000 yards. Whoever hits the most targets cleanly wins. No rests, no assistance, no excuses. Then, with a grin that betrayed a hint of excitement, he added, "And since you two made this a spectacle, the whole platoon's watching." The crowd roared approval. They took their positions side by side, prone in the dirt. The targets shimmered faintly in the sun, distant and unforgiving. Maria lay flat, tucking her rifle into her shoulder. Her fingers were steady, her breath slow. To her right, Jensen cracked his neck, peered through his modern optic, and said, "Try to keep up, Torres." The whistle blew. Crack, crack, crack. The first shots echoed in unison. At 200 yards, both hit clean. At 400, same result. But at 600, the challenge began to bite. The wind had started to whisper, carrying dust that shimmered in the sunlight. Jensen adjusted his scope, compensated with technology. Maria didn't move her sights. She closed one eye, focused on the edge of the flag near the target, and breathed. She felt the wind rather than measured it. Crack. The bullet cut through the breeze and struck dead center. "Hit!" shouted Sergeant Hayes. Jensen fired a moment later. Another hit, but slightly off-center. The recruits behind them erupted into chatter. "She's matching him shot for shot." At 700 yards, Jensen's advanced rifle gave him an edge. He fired faster, hitting his mark with machine-like precision. Maria, by contrast, took her time, adjusting her hold, waiting for the wind to ease. He smirked, lowering his rifle for a second. "Gotta move faster than that, Torres." She didn't answer. When she finally fired, the sound of her shot seemed slower, deeper, like a heartbeat. "Hit," Hayes confirmed. "Perfect." At 800 yards, Jensen finally broke his rhythm. The wind changed direction abruptly, a sudden gust that sent his bullet just wide. "Miss," Hayes called. Jensen cursed under his breath, glancing sideways. Maria waited. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's words. "Don't fight the wind. Let it tell you where it wants to go." She fired. A long pause. Then, "Hit." The crowd roared. Now, all that remained were the final two targets minus 900 and 1,000 yards. The hardest of all, sweat beaded on Jensen's brow. Despite his skill, the pressure was mounting. He adjusted his bipod, took a breath, and fired first. "Hit," he exhaled in relief. Maria didn't rush. She wiped a bead of sweat from her cheek, then sighted carefully. Her finger rested gently on the trigger. Crack. The bullet flew, a perfect arc, slicing through shimmering heat. "Hit," Hayes said, nodding slowly. They were tied. The final round. The range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. The recruits stood frozen, every eye locked on the two Marines lying in the dirt. Jensen went first. His breathing was heavy now. He checked his distance, compensated, and squeezed the trigger. Crack. The bullet struck just shy of center. A hit, but not perfect. Maria looked through her sights. Her heart was calm, her world small. Just her, the rifle, and the distant steel. She thought of her father again, his rough hands guiding hers, his patient voice saying, "The bullet's already where it needs to go, Mia. You just have to let it." Her fingers squeezed. Crack. The echo hung in the air like thunder. The target clanged, a dead center strike. For a second, nobody spoke. Then the crowd exploded. "Bullseye," yelled Hayes, grinning ear to ear. "Torres wins." Jensen sat up, blinking in disbelief. Then, to his credit, he laughed, a full, genuine laugh. He reached over and offered his hand. "All right, Torres, I can't even be mad." That was beautiful. Maria took his hand and shook it firmly. "Told you, she just needed a chance." The recruits surged forward, patting her on the back, cheering, clapping. Even the hard-nosed Sergeant Hayes cracked a smile. "I'll be damned," he said. "That's one hell of a rifle, Torres." She smiled faintly. "It's not the rifle, sir. It's the hands that hold it." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the range was empty again. Maria stayed behind, sitting alone with a rifle across her lap. She ran her fingers over the initials carved into the wood, the same way she had since the beginning. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You saw that, didn't you, Papa?" The breeze stirred gently, brushing against her face like a familiar touch. She closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt peace. That night, in the barracks, the laughter was loud. Jensen was telling the story of his loss with dramatic flair, exaggerating his own mistakes for humor. And then she fires, right? Bam! Dead center, like something out of a movie. I swear that rifle's got a soul. The platoon erupted in laughter again. Maria smiled from her corner, polishing the rifle quietly. She didn't crave the spotlight. The victory wasn't about them. It was about her promise to never forget where she came from, and to prove that honor and skill never rust. As she finished cleaning, she whispered, "Tomorrow, we start again." And she meant it. The morning after the legendary shootout, the base was still buzzing. Word had traveled fast from the barracks to the officers' mess hall about how Private Maria Torres, the quiet recruit with the rusted rifle, had outshot Corporal Jensen, one of the Marine Corps' best marksmen. Some laughed and called it beginner's luck. Others whispered about skill that couldn't be taught. But for Maria, the noise didn't matter. She hadn't come to prove she was better than anyone. She'd come to prove she belonged. Still, fame was a heavy thing to wear. As the days passed, her victory followed her everywhere. During drills, recruits looked at her differently, a mix of respect and envy. At meals, she'd catch fragments of conversation when she walked by. "Torres? Yeah, she's the one who beat Jensen. With that old rifle, too. Unreal. She's got to be on someone's radar now." But attention wasn't always friendly. Some saw her as a threat. During a gear inspection one morning, Sergeant Hayes found her cleaning her rifle, as usual. He squatted beside her and said, "You know, you made quite the impression, Torres. HQ noticed your shooting scores." She looked up, curious. "Sir?" "They're holding a selection test next week. Advanced field qualification. It's invitation only. You pass that, and you'll be cleared for sniper training." Maria froze. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one few Marines even dared to dream about. Hayes continued, his tone stern but approving. "You've got talent, Torres. But out there, it's not just about hitting targets. It's about surviving the field. Think you're ready for that?" She met his gaze and nodded. "Yes, sir." The advanced field qualification wasn't just a test. It was a gauntlet. It combined endurance, navigation, stealth, and precision shooting over a 48-hour period, deep in the wilderness surrounding the base. No sleep, limited rations, and unpredictable weather. The moment Maria heard the rules, she felt something in her chest tighten. Not fear, but resolve. When the list of participants was posted, she scanned it quickly. Jensen's name was on it too. He found her reading it and grinned. "Guess round two's coming up, huh?" Maria chuckled. "Just don't challenge me to another duel afterward." "Deal," he said, laughing. "But this time, I'm not losing to that rusty ghost of yours." The night before the test, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat by her bunk, field packing her gear, compass, rations, canteen, and her father's old rifle. As she loaded each piece of equipment, memories surfaced. Her father, Raul Torres, had been a hunter, a man of quiet discipline. He'd taught her how to track deer, how to read wind, and how to stay patient, even when the shot never came. He used to say, "The best shooters don't chase the target. They wait for it to come to them." That thought stayed with her as she tightened her straps and lay back on her bunk. The hum of the barracks filled the silence. Tomorrow would be more than just a test. It would be the truest measure of who she was becoming. At dawn, the participants lined up. The air was cold enough to sting their lungs. Sergeant Hayes stood before them, clipboard in hand, voice booming. Listen up. You've got 48 hours to complete all objectives. You'll be given a map, no GPS. There'll be stations across 10 miles of forest terrain. Expect cold, hunger, and exhaustion. The only thing that gets you through this is discipline. He let the silence hang before adding, You quit, you're done. You fail to hit your mark, you're done. You break under pressure, you're done. Then his eyes fell on Maria. You make history. You earn it. They were off. Maria moved swiftly, every sense awake. The forest was dense, with uneven ground and slick mud from last night's rain. Each recruit had their own route, their own set of coordinates to reach. The first station was a marksmanship test, a moving target 400 yards away, visible only through breaks in the trees. She crouched low, wiped moisture from her sights, and aimed. The forest was silent, no wind, no birds. Just the faint sound of her breathing. Crack! The bullet struck dead center. The instructor at the station raised his eyebrows, but said nothing, only marking her score before waving her onward. Hours passed. The second station involved crawling through mud under live fire, a grueling reminder that perfection on the range didn't mean survival in the field. Her arms ached, her knees burned, and mud coated her face. But her focus never faltered. When others hesitated, she moved. When they complained, she stayed silent. By nightfall, she'd reached the observation checkpoint, a small ridge overlooking a clearing. She checked her map, calculated her next route, and rested against a tree. The stars peeked through the clouds, faint but comforting. She ate half a protein bar, drank a few sips of water, and tried to keep her mind sharp. Somewhere in the distance, a faint voice called out, Jensen's, you still alive out there, Torres? She smiled into the dark. Still waiting for you to catch up. He laughed. You're a ghost, I swear. Maybe, she whispered, but ghosts don't miss. By the second morning, fatigue hit hard. Her muscles screamed, and the cold gnawed at her fingers. The next test was the toughest yet, the stealth course. She had to reach a designated target without being spotted by patrolling instructors equipped with thermal sensors. One false move, and it was over. Maria wrapped her face with mud to mask heat, moved slowly through tall grass, timing every step with the rustle of wind and the calls of birds. One instructor passed within 10 feet of her position. She froze, heart pounding so loud she feared it would give her away. He paused, scanning the area, and moved on. She exhaled quietly, inching forward until the next ridge came into sight. At the end of the course, she raised her rifle and fired a single shot through a narrow window in the trees. Clang. Hit. The evaluator confirmed over the radio. That evening, as the recruits regrouped at the final checkpoint, exhaustion hung heavy. Out of 20 participants, only 7 remained. Jensen was among them, mud-streaked and grinning despite his limp. When he saw her, he shook his head. How do you even look that calm right now? Maria shrugged, smiling. Guess I've had practice. He laughed. You ever stop proving people wrong? Not when they keep underestimating me. The final challenge came at sunset, one last test of endurance and precision. The target was nearly invisible, hidden in the fading light, at a distance that even experienced snipers found difficult. Maria took position, lying flat against the cold earth. The world around her blurred, the shouting, the breathing, the wind. All she could see was that tiny white circle in the distance. Her vision tunneled. Her heartbeat slowed. The rifle felt like an extension of her arm. Crack. The sound echoed for miles. Hit, center. The evaluator shouted. And just like that, it was done. When the results were posted the next day, Maria Torres ranked first overall. Sergeant Hayes read the list aloud, pride flickering in his voice. Outstanding work, Marines. You've proven what this corps stands for. Skill, endurance, and grit. And Torres. He paused, meeting her eyes. You just earned your sniper qualification recommendation. The room erupted in applause. Jensen was the first to step forward and salute her. You didn't just prove yourself, he said. You reminded all of us what the old ways still mean. Maria nodded quietly. It's not about old or new. It's about respect for every lesson, every shot, every person who came before. That night, she sat alone at the edge of the base, the stars mirrored in her rifle's barrel. She thought of her father again, the way he smiled when she hit her first bullseye as a little girl, the pride in his eyes, the calloused hands that had shaped her path. Looks like we made it, Papa, she whispered. And though the night was still, she swore she could feel his presence, steady, silent, proud. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But she was ready. Because rust, she knew now, wasn't weakness. It was proof that something had endured. The wind over Camp Pendleton carried the scent of salt and sand. It was early morning, and the sound of the Pacific rolled softly against the distant shore. The base was waking up, boots thudding, orders shouted, rifles clattering. But for Maria Torres, this morning was different. Today, she wasn't just another recruit. Today, she was beginning sniper school. Her name had been called a week earlier, officially selected after her top-ranked performance in the advanced field qualification. The announcement had drawn applause from the entire platoon. Even Corporal Jensen had grinned proudly, saying, "You're gonna make history, Torres. Just don't forget us regular folks when you're famous." But Maria wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing purpose, and maybe a promise made long ago, to a father who never stopped believing in her. Sniper school was unlike anything she had ever experienced. From day one, the instructors made it clear. Shooting skill meant nothing if your mind wasn't sharper than your sight. The class started with 15 Marines. By the end of the first week, 4 had dropped out. The drills were brutal, crawling through cactus thorns and rocks for hours, lying still under a burning sun, waiting for a single chance to take one perfect shot. Every movement, every breath was monitored. "Your rifle doesn't shoot," said Gunnery Sergeant Rhodes, a grizzled instructor with 20 years in reconnaissance. "You do, and if you can't control yourself, your weapon's useless." Maria listened closely. His words hit deep. They reminded her of her father's lessons. A rifle is only as steady as the hands that hold it. So she practiced, not just her aim, but her patience. Week after week, the tests became harder. In one drill, the trainees were dropped into the desert with only a map, a compass, and a single objective: hit a 500-yard target without being spotted. The instructors, acting as spotters, scanned the field with binoculars, trying to catch even a flicker of movement. For hours, Maria crawled through dust and thorns, her body screaming in pain. Sweat trickled down her forehead and pooled in her eyes, stinging her vision. Every inch forward took minutes. Every sound mattered, the rustle of a sleeve, the crunch of a pebble. She moved like a shadow. When she finally reached her position, she steadied her rifle, slowed her breathing, and fired. Clang. The target fell. The radio crackled. Target hit. Shooter unseen. That phrase, shooter unseen, became her new badge of honor. But sniper school wasn't just about skill. It tested loyalty, judgment, and restraint. During a nighttime exercise, Maria was paired with Jensen again. The instructors had brought him in as a field observer, now that he'd recovered from an injury. The mission was simple: observe a simulated enemy camp and transmit coordinates without engaging. For hours, they lay in the wet grass, barely breathing. Through her scope, Maria could see the distant glow of lanterns. The enemy moved below, silhouettes carrying mock rifles. Then, a voice crackled through her earpiece. "Torres Jensen, abort the mission. Return to base." But Jensen had seen something through his binoculars. A figure moving toward their flank, armed and advancing. "We've got company," he whispered. Maria froze. The rules were clear: no engagement. But if they waited too long, they could be captured and fail the exercise. "Orders are orders," she murmured. "Yeah, but survival," he replied. Before she could answer, Jensen raised his training rifle and fired a blank. A flare shot up, the sign of detection. Within seconds, lights burst on, and instructors appeared out of nowhere. "Exercise compromised," shouted Rhodes. "Both of you up." Maria clenched her fists. The mission was over. Back at camp, Rhodes paced before them, fury burning in his eyes. "Who gave you permission to fire, Corporal?" Jensen stood tall. "It was my call, sir. I believed we were compromised." Rhodes turned to Maria. "And you, Torres? You didn't stop him?" She hesitated. "No, sir." "Then you both failed?" "Out there, hesitation kills. But so does disobedience." He leaned closer. "You two better figure out which one's worse, before the real test comes." That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat outside the barracks, her rifle across her knees, moonlight tracing its edges. She wasn't angry at Jensen. He'd acted on instinct. But the lesson weighed heavy. Being a sniper wasn't about heroics. It was about control. She remembered her father's voice again, soft but firm. "Sometimes, the hardest shot is the one you don't take." She repeated it quietly until her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the waves in the distance. The next day, when Rhodes announced a second field exercise, a real one this time, she was ready. This time, the mission was live. The trainees were deployed to a coastal training zone, rough terrain, unpredictable weather, wheel ammunition. They were to locate and identify mock targets scattered across 10 square miles. The catch? Only one bullet per target. Maria was partnered again with Jensen, and though he still carried a hint of guilt from their failed drill, he smiled as they prepared. "All right, Torres," he said, checking his gear. "You call the wind. I'll trust your judgment." She nodded. "And I'll trust your eyes." They moved as one, through brush, over ridges, crawling through cold sand dunes that scraped against their elbows. Hours passed in silence. At last, they spotted the first target, a wooden silhouette perched near a rusted car at 700 yards. Maria set her rifle down, adjusting her sight. The wind was soft, but shifting. She waited. Jensen whispered, "Left gust, quarter value." She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. Crack. The target splintered in half. "Hit," Jensen whispered, grinning. As dusk fell, they reached the final ridge. The last target was barely visible, a small steel plate at nearly 1,000 yards, half hidden behind brush. Jensen looked at her. "You sure you can see that?" Maria smiled faintly. "I don't have to see it. I can feel it." He chuckled. "You and that sixth sense again." She steadied herself, controlling her breath. The world faded, no sound, no wind, no movement. Just the invisible line between her and the target. Crack! The sound echoed across the dunes. After a long second, the faintest clang reached their ears. "Hit," Jensen said softly. awe in his voice. They both laughed, quiet, relieved laughter that cut through the exhaustion. When they returned to base, Gunnery Sergeant Rhodes was waiting. He didn't smile, but his tone was lighter than usual. "You two redeemed yourselves," he said. "Clean mission. Perfect communication. That's what a sniper team looks like." He looked directly at Maria. "You've got something special, Torres. But remember, this isn't just about accuracy. It's about responsibility. Every bullet you fire changes something forever." She nodded. "I understand, sir." "Good," he said. "Then get some rest. Tomorrow, we take the sniper's oath." The next morning, under a sky painted gold by dawn, the remaining trainees stood in formation. Only 7 had made it through. In front of them, Rhodes held a small leather-bound book, the Sniper's Creed. He read aloud, "I will never quit. I will never forget that my weapon is a last resort, not my first. I will remain unseen, unheard, and unstoppable. My purpose is not glory. It is precision." Each Marine repeated the words in unison. When it was Maria's turn, her voice didn't waver. "I will never forget that my weapon is a last resort, not my first." She felt her father's spirit in those words. He'd never been in the military, but his lessons had shaped her as much as any drill. Rhodes stepped forward, placing a single silver insignia, the sniper's mark, in her palm. "Congratulations, Marine," he said. "You've earned this." Maria looked at it, the insignia gleaming softly in her hand. It wasn't just a symbol of skill. It was the embodiment of everything she'd endured: doubt, pain, patience, and pride. She whispered under her breath, "For you, Papa." That evening, she sat at the edge of the training field, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Jensen joined her, sitting quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You know, Torres, when you first showed up with that rusty rifle, I thought you were out of your mind." She smiled. "You weren't wrong." He laughed softly. "Maybe not. But you taught me something. Doesn't matter how shiny the weapon is. What matters is the heart behind it." Maria looked at her rifle, the same old piece of steel and wood that had carried her through every trial. "It's not rust," she said quietly. "It's memory." Jensen nodded. "Then keep it that way." They sat in silence as the stars appeared one by one, the night settling around them like a quiet promise. The first deployment came quietly, without fanfare. Maria Torres and her sniper team were assigned to a reconnaissance mission in a remote desert zone, a training exercise that now felt frighteningly real. Her heart thumped with anticipation as the helicopter lifted off, carrying the small squad over jagged canyons and endless dunes. The sun reflected harshly off the sand, and the wind tore at their uniforms, carrying fine grains that stung the eyes. Maria sat in silence, her rifle resting across her lap, old wood and steel, polished to perfection. Jensen was beside her, checking gear, humming a soft, nervous tune. "First real mission, huh?" he said. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Time to prove we can survive." The drop zone was unforgiving. Dry heat pressed against their bodies as they moved through valleys and ridges, eyes scanning for targets and signs of threat. The team's orders were clear: observe, report, and avoid confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Maria's mind focused. Every movement, every sound, every shadow mattered. This was no longer a drill. This was a test of her life and the lives of her team. Hours into their mission, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Through the haze, Maria spotted figures moving near a distant outpost, the enemy. They were training targets for now, but the simulation was designed to mimic unpredictable danger. Her breathing slowed, her eye aligned with the scope. Every principle her father had taught her, Every lesson from sniper school came flooding back. Patience, observation, precision, crack. She fired a blank round, signaling the team. A distant target fell. Jensen gave her a subtle nod. Good call. As they progressed, the terrain grew more treacherous. Sandstorms swept across the desert without warning, reducing visibility to mere meters. The team huddled together behind rocks, shielding their rifles, waiting for the storm to pass. Maria's old rifle had weathered it all: rain, mud, dust, and sun. Now it faced the desert winds, and she treated it with reverence, wiping off sand, checking the sights, adjusting every detail with meticulous care. One moment of carelessness could ruin everything. She remembered Rhodes' words: "A sniper's strength isn't in the rifle, it's in the mind behind it." Night fell, and the mission continued under moonlight. The team had to navigate a ridge with near-total darkness, moving silently to avoid detection. At a certain point, Jensen stumbled. His foot caught a rock, sending a soft echo through the canyon. Maria froze, heart racing, then motioned him to stay low. "Quiet," she whispered. They waited. A pair of instructors, shadowing them, moved past without noticing. Maria exhaled slowly, then led them forward, inch by inch. Her nerves were stretched, but her resolve never wavered. This was what she had trained for, not just shooting, but survival, patience, and responsibility. The final objective was the most challenging: identify the high-value target in a cluster of buildings across the valley, relay coordinates without being detected, and return safely. Maria crawled into position, her rifle steady on a tripod. Through the scope, she could see the faint outlines of figures and equipment. A wrong decision, a premature signal, and the mission would fail. Jensen whispered, "I see him. Bottom left corner building. Wait for my signal." Maria nodded. Her eye on the scope, she could see the man moving, just a silhouette, but her heart recognized him as the target. The wind shifted suddenly, whipping sand across her face. She adjusted, remembering her father's lessons about the wind and trajectory. Then, almost instinctively, she fired a single shot, precise, deadly accurate, hitting the target perfectly. Clang. "Coordinates confirmed," came Jensen's voice. The team exhaled in relief. As they exfiltrated under cover of darkness, Maria reflected on the journey she had taken. The same rifle that had earned mockery and doubt had now become a symbol of skill, patience, and perseverance. Her hands were calloused, her arms fatigued, but her heart was steady. She realized that every step, from childhood lessons with her father, to Marine boot camp, to sniper school, had prepared her for this. She also understood something deeper. The mission wasn't about glory. It was about responsibility, protecting lives through skill, judgment, and restraint. Jensen, walking beside her, broke the silence. "Torres, you really are something else." She smiled faintly. "We all are if we survive." The next morning, after returning to base, the instructors debriefed the team. Maria's accuracy and decisions during the mission were singled out as exemplary. Gunnery Sergeant Rhodes addressed the team. "You all performed well, but one Marine stood above the rest. Torres, you've not only mastered your rifle, but you've mastered your judgment, patience, and responsibility. That's what a sniper truly is." The platoon clapped. Jensen shook his head in disbelief and pride. "I lost fair and square." Maria shook her head. "You didn't lose. You taught me things I couldn't have learned alone." Later that evening, Maria returned to the quiet edge of the base. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. She held her rifle across her lap, looking at the faint scratches and rusted marks that had carried her through every trial. She whispered softly, "Papa, we did it. We really did it." Her father's voice seemed to echo in the wind, carrying encouragement and pride. "I always knew you'd make it, Mia. Now, show them how strong you are, not just with a rifle, but with your heart." Maria understood now that her journey was far from over. There would be more missions, tougher choices, and situations that tested courage, wisdom, and empathy. But she felt ready. Her rifle wasn't just a tool. It was a promise, a memory, a testament to every lesson learned, every struggle endured, and every life she had touched along the way. The desert wind rustled the straps of her pack. She stood, rifle slung across her shoulder, and walked back toward the base. She was no longer the girl mocked for her rusty rifle. She was a Marine. She was a sniper. She was Maria Torres, unstoppable, disciplined, and unbroken. And the world would remember her name. The sun had barely risen over Camp Pendleton when Maria Torres stepped onto the training field. The light glinted off her rifle, the same one that had earned her mockery, respect, and finally, mastery. The rifle's wood and steel bore scratches, faded paint, and rusted spots, but Maria saw in it a story of endurance, patience, and triumph. She walked slowly, her boots crunching on the gravel, past rows of recruits who were starting their day. Many of them paused to look at her, whispers spreading like wildfire. "That's her, Maria Torres. She beat Jensen. She's a sniper now." She nodded politely, but kept her eyes forward. Titles and recognition were meaningless to her. What mattered was the journey, the lessons learned, and the lives she had touched along the way. Today, Maria was no longer just a sniper. She was an instructor, a mentor to the next generation of Marines. The recruits watched her demonstrate proper rifle handling, positioning, and breath control. Her movements were precise, fluid, and confident. Every gesture carried authority, yet warmth. "Your rifle is an extension of yourself," she told the class, holding her own weapon reverently. "Treat it with respect, practice with discipline, and never underestimate what patience can achieve. Rust doesn't make it weak, it makes it proven." A young recruit raised a hand, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Ma'am, how do you stay calm under pressure?" Maria smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the horizon. She remembered crawling through deserts, crawling through mud, waiting hours for a single shot. She remembered the nights of rain, the moments of doubt, and her father's steady voice guiding her. "You focus on the moment, not the fear," she said softly. "One shot, one decision, one breath at a time. The rest will follow." During breaks, she often found herself speaking to recruits one-on-one, teaching not only marksmanship, but patience, observation, and responsibility. Private Lewis, the same young man who had once whispered, "Seems like you already are perfect," approached her timidly. "Ma'am, can you show me how you calculate wind like that?" Maria nodded. "Of course. But remember, it's not about formulas alone. You have to feel it, sense it. The air, the movement, even the rustling of leaves. Listen to it, respect it." As she adjusted his aim, she thought about her own journey, from a girl mocked for a rusty rifle to a Marine, whose skill and discipline inspired others. Every bruise, every failure, every sleepless night had built this moment, not for recognition, but for purpose. In the afternoon, Jensen appeared, leaning casually against the doorway of the shooting range. His modern rifle gleamed in the sunlight. "Teaching already, huh?" he asked, grinning. Maria looked up, smiling faintly. "Someone has to keep the next generation from repeating our mistakes." He chuckled. "You ever think about how far you've come? Rusty rifle, mocked by everyone. And now look at you. You're a legend here." "I'm not a legend," Maria replied calmly. "I'm someone who kept learning. Someone who kept moving forward, even when people doubted me." Jensen nodded slowly, respect in his eyes. "Well, You've certainly taught all of us a lesson." That evening, the training field was empty. Maria sat on the ridge overlooking the base, her rifle across her knees. The sky was painted with fiery orange and purple hues. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Papa, we did it." Her father's words echoed in her mind, steady and proud. "Remember, Mia, strength isn't always about power. It's about endurance, patience, and heart. You've got all three." A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of earth and metal. Maria traced her fingers over the carved initials on the rifle. R.T. Raul Torres. Every scratch, every rust spot, every dent was a story, a memory, a lesson, a promise kept. She realized then that the rifle was more than a weapon. It was a bridge between her past and her future, between the lessons of her father and the Marines she now mentored. Weeks turned into months, and Maria continued teaching, training, and mentoring. Recruits came and went, each carrying a piece of her guidance with them. Her reputation spread beyond Camp Pendleton. Other bases requested her presence, her insight, her unique approach to sniper training. Yet, despite accolades and attention, Maria remained grounded. She never sought the spotlight. She didn't care about medals or headlines. What mattered was discipline, patience, and the ability to inspire others to reach their potential. Even Jensen noticed the change in her, not just as a sniper, but as a leader, a teacher, and a symbol of resilience. One evening, as they walked along the cliffs overlooking the ocean, he said quietly, "Torres, you've changed the way all of us think about this. Not just shooting, but life." Maria smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it's not me alone. It's every mistake I made, every failure I survived, and every lesson I learned." He nodded, understanding that this was bigger than pride. This was legacy. The most meaningful moment came during the annual marksmanship demonstration, where seasoned Marines showcased their skill to new recruits and commanding officers. Maria took her place with her rifle, the same one that had sparked laughter and disbelief years ago. She moved with precision, calm, and grace. Each shot hit its mark with unerring accuracy. The crowd held its breath, then erupted in applause. Afterward, a young recruit approached her, wide-eyed. "Ma'am, you didn't miss a single target. How?" Maria knelt down, meeting his gaze. "Because I learned to respect the rifle, respect the moment, and respect myself. Rust doesn't make it weak. It proves it's been tested. Every scar tells a story." The recruit nodded, absorbing the lesson more than the technique. That night, Maria sat alone, rifle across her lap, looking at the stars. The journey had been long, from the ridiculed recruit with a rusty rifle to the sniper instructor who inspired others. She realized that her true victory wasn't the missions she had completed or the targets she had hit. It was the legacy she was leaving, of discipline, patience, resilience, and respect. She whispered softly into the night, "This is for you, Papa, for every lesson, every word, every story you gave me." We made it. The wind stirred gently, carrying her words across the base. The rifle rested in her hands, quiet but alive, a testament to perseverance, honor, and memory. Maria Torres had started as a girl mocked for her rusted rifle. She had endured, trained, and grown into a Marine who not only mastered her weapon, but mastered herself. And now, she had become more than just a sniper. She was a teacher, a leader, a legend. A symbol that strength isn't measured by the shine of a weapon or the approval of others, but by the heart and persistence behind every shot, every choice, and every step forward. As dawn broke over the base, Maria stood, rifle slung over her shoulder. The new recruits gathered, eager, uncertain, and wide-eyed. She smiled. It was their turn to learn. And she would make sure they understood. Rust and steel, patience and precision, courage and heart, all of it mattered. The legacy of Maria Torres had only just begun.